Hello, students. Welcome back. And today we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday on our topic of conservation. And if you recall, yesterday we kind of left on a sad note with this equation I asked you to remember. If consumption is greater than the resource, it can only equal one thing, and that is depletion. And depletion is something that everybody wants to avoid. Let's be honest. No matter what your outlook on the world is, no matter what political party you belong to, no matter what philosophy you have, no matter where you are in the world, nobody wants a depleted resource, because once resources are depleted, well, you can't do anything fun anymore, and you may even die, and nobody wants that. So how can we avoid depletion of resources? Well, that's where we turn the page and we get a little bit happier today, because you can do something about it. There are things you can do to avoid this nasty equation from ever happening. So let's talk about some things we can do. Number one, we can reduce. This is the first R word we're going to refer to today. Reduce. Reducing energy consumption is a fantastic, simple activity we can all take part in to help eliminate the possibility of resource depletion. Reducing energy consumption. We can reduce the use and we can increase efficiency. We'll probably be playing around with a couple of light bulbs this week, and you will see how if it is light that you want from a light bulb, I'll be showing you some different light bulbs, different kinds of light bulbs, and how efficient some are and how some are not efficient at all in terms of releasing light. An incandescent light, for instance, gives off an enormous amount of heat and only a little bit of light. They are not efficient. These new light bulbs that are out now, these LED lights are incredibly efficient. But not only are they efficient, which means they don't give off a lot of heat, because they're efficient, they use a lot less energy. If your house is powered with LED lights, you could leave the lights on all day long, and it won't really even impact the amount of electricity that you're using. Now, I'm not encouraging you to leave the lights on, don't get me wrong. But just recently here in the school, if you look up, we have changed all of the lights to LED lights. Why? Because it saves a lot of money. It just makes sense from an economic point of view, and it also makes sense from an environmental point of view, because not only does it cost less, but you are reducing the energy consumption, which is why it costs less. You're using less energy. So reducing energy consumption is one thing. Reducing the material consumption is another. And you know what? Here's one I have to talk about a little bit more. Reducing material consumption. I have a picture in the middle here. At the beginning of every year, I give you all a pencil. I have to take a deep breath because this one kind of aggravates me a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. I have to be honest with you. Every day at the end of the day in the laboratory here, I am constantly picking up pencils from the floor. I even take pencils out of the garbage. Now, when I say pencils, I'm talking about full-length pencils, not ones that have been used up. And this is a rhetorical question. Don't answer it out loud. But how many of you come to class every day without a pencil and then have to take one from the room and borrow one from me and you use another pencil? I would love for you to use your pencil until there's nothing left of the pencil before you throw it out or lose it or leave it behind. I have every year I start off with thousands of pencils, and before the end of the year, all of those pencils are gone. It breaks my heart because, well, what do you think? Pencils grow on trees? But actually, they do. Pencils do grow on trees because that's where pencil wood comes from. However, what's in the pencil? Inside the pencil is not lead, but graphite. Graphite is a mineral. You may remember learning about it in the first unit. Graphite is mined. And the more you use up the graphite and using it for its intended purpose is one thing, but just throwing it out, you're wasting the graphite, which then has to be mined in order to make new pencils. Now, some of you might argue, well, that's why I want to use a pen. The pen's the same deal, folks. You got to get the ink from somewhere. You got to manufacture the plastic for that pen. And you might argue that a pen is a much worse use of natural resources, which we've learned about, because you're drawing from the petrochemical industry to make those plastics. A pencil, when you're done using it, can be burned. The wood can be burned, and it can degrade naturally in a landfill. But so pencils are really more economic and environmental. They're cheaper and they're better for the environment, but you have to use it and not misuse it. So I'd love for you this week and next week. In fact, I'd love for you for the rest of the year to see how long can you make a single pencil last. In fact, you know what? I might even give some bonus points out for individuals who use your pencil until there's nothing left of it. I would love to see you use your pencil wisely. And after all, that's conservation. So use less materials would be a good way of reducing your use of materials. That will also help reduce the production of waste. If you use something up, there won't be anything left to throw out. After all, right down the street from you folks, there is a landfill. And periodically, I take things to the landfill and I see year after year how much bigger the mountain is becoming in the landfill because of all of the waste disposed there. Now, we need some place to throw out the garbage. I'm not saying we shouldn't have landfills, but how much waste could we reduce going into the landfill if we reduced the amount we threw out? I'd love for you to think about for the rest of the year how much you as an individual, how much you as a family, how much you as a school or community throw out every day. Do you think there are things you could do to reduce the amount of waste? Think about how you might change your habits of using certain resources, and you might be able to reduce the amount of things you actually throw away. Do you really need to throw out a full sheet of paper if you've only written one line on it? Maybe you could do something else with that paper. Speaking of that, it leads us into the next R. So the first R is reduce. The second R is reuse. We live in what's referred to as a throwaway culture. We use things once and we throw it away. I mean, look at computers, for goodness sakes, or better yet, cell phones. Cell phones have become nearly disposable. You use a cell phone for a few months these days, and then you've got to upgrade it. And what do you do with the other one? You throw it away. You think about all of the resources that go into making a cell phone or a laptop computer or a tablet or any other type of electronic device, for instance. There are so many different elements and minerals and compounds and materials that have to be mined and fabricated and manufactured that go into a lot of these electric devices. And just simply throwing them away is, well, dangerous. There are some cultures in the world that realize that so many valuable things have been thrown away. They literally go mining landfills and they try to extract all of these valuable resources that so many people just discard. So reusing things, finding other purposes for for materials. In fact, that's the next line here is repurposing materials. There are so many things that you can do. In fact, we're going to be repurposing materials later this week in our lab activity. We're going to be taking something that would normally be thrown away and we're going to create something with it. We're going to repurpose some of the material and create treasure from trash. I think it's wonderful when people utilize this concept of repurposing materials. In fact, I think it's making a comeback where instead of just throwing things out, we reuse it, we repurpose it for something else. In fact, you can make a lot of money by repurposing garbage, turning garbage into money, turning trash into treasure. I challenge you this week to try and find something that normally you'd throw out, make something out of it that either you or someone else could profit from. Maybe there's some bonus points available to you if you can find a way to repurpose some otherwise easily thrown out material. Now, I'm not suggesting you go into the trash can and take out some disgusting stuff. Don't do that. That would just be gross, okay? But before you throw it out, think about what else could I do with this particular material. In fact, while you're thinking about what to throw out and what not to throw out, think of our third R, which is recycle. Recycling resources. It's starting to catch on more. I hope it continues to catch on. I know there are laws passed that require recycling, but think about this. If you recycled all of the paper, all of the glass, all of the plastic, and all of the metal that you normally throw out, what would be left to throw out? Maybe you're thinking about it and you're thinking, well, all the food that I don't eat. Well, wait a minute. Plant material food, you could recycle that too. You could recycle that in a compost pile. Think about this for a moment, folks. Think about what would you throw out? What would be thrown out and brought to a landfill if we had 100% recycling of our paper, glass, plastic, metal, and I'll add the composting materials? I challenge you to come up with some things that would eventually go into a landfill if you recycled everything. Now, with some products, it might be challenging to recycle, I'll grant you that. But by separating true trash from things that can be recycled, there are organizations, there are groups, there are people who take your waste and don't waste it. They can separate the resources from the waste stream before it gets to the landfill, so that we can reuse and repurpose and recycle the materials that ultimately come from those resources we were talking about at the beginning of the week, the natural resources, because some of these are non renewable. Think about that the next time you're ready to throw something out. Now, I've mentioned more than once to avoid this material making its way to the landfill. So let's talk a little bit about the landfill. I'm going to show you a video about a landfill at the end of this lesson, especially since you live right down the street from a big landfill. So what is it? Well, it's a storage facility for solid waste. In other words, it's a garbage dump, but it is more technical than that. Thankfully, today we have technology that enables us to design, construct, and use landfills that are a little bit more environmentally friendly as well as economic. But a landfill essentially is where your garbage ends up. So when you throw out a garbage bag and a garbage can out on the street, and the garbage truck comes and picks it up, it more than likely will bring it to a facility that looks like this, a landfill. Now, hopefully, the landfill that is utilized by your trash company is well designed. Think about this cross section, this diagram here for a moment. Okay. Here's a pile of trash. If we just put a pile of trash on the ground, especially where we live in this rural area of New Jersey, every time it rained, the water would leach through the garbage and drip those nasty things into the water table, and you would be pumping out the water that you drink and drinking all of those nasty chemicals and pollutants from the landfill. That would be bad. So, in order to avoid as much as possible that scenario from happening, a landfill typically is built initially with a clay liner. And if you think back to our soil lesson, you remember something about clay. Clay is impermeable. In other words, it doesn't allow water to flow through it, at least not all that well. And so lining a landfill with clay, with a thick clay liner and packing it down can at least help, maybe not eliminate totally, but it can help reduce the amount of nasty stuff that flows down into the water table that we depend upon. Now, for those things that might leach through the clay liner, a landfill will have wells all around it that are constantly pumping out the water, especially the water from underneath the landfill, because if it detects any pollutants, it will be able to remediate or to clean up that pollution before it gets into your water well and you start poisoning yourself, which would be bad. Now, trash, if you've ever noticed a trash can that's been sitting around for a while, you know that it starts to smell, right? Oh, yeah. Rotting trash produces gas, nasty gases. Some of those gases include methane gas, a hydrocarbon we talked about when we learned about fossil fuels. Well, the interesting thing about landfills, and the landfill down the street from us does this, they've installed gas wells in the trash itself. And they suck out the methane gas that comes from the rotting trash. And that methane gas is burned. And it's burned and can be utilized to actually make energy, to produce electricity. In fact, last I heard, our local landfill burns enough methane to produce electricity for over 1,000 of your homes in the area. So you might be powering your computer at home with electricity that was formed from the burning of the trash that you threw out last year. It's entirely possible. But when a landfill is complete, or as parts of landfills are completed, a top layer of soil is put over it, and it's called a cap. That capping a landfill enables the landfill to be protected from further addition of garbage and trash and hazardous material. It can also be covered with layers of vegetation, and the vegetation can help clean the decomposing material in the landfill. But it is intended to help the environment long term and perhaps even be utilized for long time into the future. So a landfill being used as a storage facility for solid waste can actually become an energy production facility eventually, because that rotting garbage can eventually be used to produce energy. And let's face it, nobody would want to really live on top of an old landfill. So, depending upon where the landfill is, it might actually be able to be utilized. The property could be utilized for solar energy and wind energy in the future. So, a landfill is not necessarily a terrible thing to avoid. After all, we've got to do something with the garbage we do produce. We want to minimize the garbage by reducing, reusing, and recycling. But we still will have some garbage that needs to be thrown away. So let's do so wisely. Because if we do things wisely, we can avoid that dirty D word we mentioned at the beginning, depletion. And this is where we're going to be finishing up here today, because this word is super important: sustainability. Sustainability is resource use without depletion. It just makes sense. It makes sense no matter what your background is and what your desires are in life. Resource use without depletion just makes sense on so many different levels for us as individuals, for our population at large, as well as for the entire planet. It just makes sense. Sustainability. And examples of sustainability are applied to various areas, including forestry, agriculture, water treatment plants, fisheries. The list goes on and on and on, all of which impact us individually and collectively. So, sustainability is the name of the game. It's the word of the week, you might say. If you remember what sustainability is all about, then we can all grow old happily knowing that we're not depleting the resources for the next generation. So, with that all said, I hope you really have some food for thought there, and you reuse those thoughts for words over and over again as you contemplate this whole topic of conservation. But for now, I'm going to say bye-bye.